What's good people? Thank you for joining me. We are we're doing a reading today of the Family Blood on the Family Bloodline podcast, just covering Project 2025. I started this a few weeks ago. However, I ended up slacking up a bit. I decided to focus on my kids while they were with me a bit more. And now that they're not here with me right now, currently, I'm going to do my best to continue the reading. So that's what's going on right now. Hopefully everybody's had a good Sunday and things have gone your way. If not, the hope is as you continue your evening, things get better for you. So I'll be jumping into Project 2025. As you can see, for those of you all who are actually if you're watching on my YouTube or if you're watching on uh, TikTok or anything. Actually, if you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook or on my Discord, I'll end up posting a link in the chat so you can give your opinions about what's being read, what's being covered. Um, and I will absolutely pause in place when viewers want so that we can go into it. And so as you can see, again, for those of you all who are with me uh, on YouTube or even on Facebook, as you can see, I have Project 2025, the mandate for leadership, the conservative promise is what it says, pulled up. And I will be scrolling through in the event you just want to follow along. So by all means, just uh, just bear with it and let me check something real quick. Let me check something real quick. I want to make sure everyone is able to patch in. So the link that I just posted on TikTok under Jay Glass, that's the link that you can hop into if you have any questions, comments, or if you need me to read something else, or if you want to hop on to this other panel that I'm on, or you can jump over to the Family Bloodline podcast on YouTube, or you can catch it on Jay Glass as well on YouTube, or again you can catch it on my Discord. You can so various other places you'll be able to catch it. But if you would, please make sure you like the actual the stream as I go through and I read and share if you feel so dedicated to do as much. So I'll scroll back down to the table of contents because I want to pick it up in a bit of a different place than what I left off last time. So give me a second as I go through this. So as again, as you can see, this is the Project 2025 on the Heritage page, and it's the mandate for leadership, the conservative promise, right? It's the conservative promise. And I'm not saying that that should be so much concerning, but again, this is the conservative promise per the author per chapter um, in this actual document. And so as I scroll down through the table of contents, it gives the actual authors for each actual chapter and each actual part that was written. They wrote it themselves and they made sure that their names were added to the rows, as it were, and the polls to be listed on it. So we will get ready uh, to jump into the reading in a second here. I'm working multiple different platforms at once, looking back and forth, trying to make sure I stay steady. So again, for those of you all who are with me on YouTube, you can see the actual screen and it's showing the table of contents is showing the author of each particular part that had a hand in that authored that part of the document. So make sure, I recommend that you take note of these names so that it's not something that's lost or someone can back away from something that they wrote in black and white, right? They should endorse. If the document that you wrote is such a great document, you should always endorse the things that you read. Um, Again, unfortunately, on TikTok, I'm not sharing the screen. However, on YouTube, I am sharing the screen, and you can find me on YouTube if you go and look at the Family Bloodline Podcast 5823, or if you go and look up Jay Glass. So I'll get ready to start reading this in a second. I want to get past the bureaucratic mumbo jumbo that I was looking at the first time I began reading this, and I want to pick up on the different agencies. So, like number 3, section 1, part 3, central personnel agencies. I'm not going to read that. Managing the bureaucracy. That is authored by Donald Devin, Dennis Dean Kirk, and Paul Dans. I want to, however, jump into section 2, which is called the Common Defense. And I'll start at part 4, and it begins to talk about the Department of Defense. And this part in particular was written by Christopher Miller. This part was written by Christopher Miller. And so, oh yeah, no, I can't read that. That's a bit small. Let's blow that up some so everybody can see that. So, Department of Defense by Christian Miller. I'll jump right into it. It starts. The Constitution requires the federal government to provide for the common defense. It assigns to Congress the authority to raise and support armies and to provide and maintain a navy, and specifies that the president is commander in chief of America's armed forces. Ever since our founding, Americans have understood that the surest way to avoid war is to be prepared for it in peace. But when deterrence fails, we must fight and win. That sounds like a very familiar campaign slogan at the time. Aha. Just throwing that out there. The Department of Defense, DoD, is the largest part of the federal government. It has almost 3 million people serving in uniform or civilian capacity throughout the world and consumes approximately 850 billion annually, more than 50% of our government's discretionary spending. The DoD is also a deeply troubled institution. Historically, the military has been one of America's most trusted institutions, but years of sustained misuse, a two-tiered culture of accountability that shields senior officers and officials while exposing junior officers and soldiers in the field, wasteful spending, wildly shifting security policies, exceedingly poor discipline in program execution, and, most recently, the Biden administration's profoundly unserious equity agenda and vaccine mandates have taken a serious toll. Now, I just want to pause for a quick second with that last sentence that was actually stated. I want to make sure that everyone knows that, yes, at one point in the military, it was mandated that you take COVID vaccines. It was an absolute mandate. However, that had been, it got rescinded, as it were. It was rolled back. Unfortunately, it affected a lot of good soldiers, great honest soldiers that I know of, and they were quote unquote let go of, but they were involuntarily separated from the army. However, with the repeal or the rescinding of the mandatory vaccine practices, those soldiers were allowed to uh, put themselves back in good standing with the military service. Some people actually capitalized on it, and some soldiers didn't. Some soldiers were simply finished. There is a part in here that I do actually agree with as well, where it talks about, let me see if I can find it. Oh, it talks about um, the sentence that says historically the military has been one of America's most trusted institutions, but years of sustained misuse, a two-tiered culture of accountability that shields senior officers and officials while exposing junior officers and soldiers in the field, wasteful spending, wildly shifting security policies, exceedingly poor discipline, and program execution. There's some of that I absolutely agree with. There has been, unfortunately, an unspoken thing of a lot of senior officials who have committed horrendous acts being allowed to simply gracefully bow out or retire. Um, a practice that should have came with actual dire consequences. Unfortunately, that does not always happen. And we've seen it happen uh, less times than it should have. So I do agree with that. Now, the part that paragraph left off, and it may have been intentional, it may not have been, I'm not sure. But the part that has left off is the things that paragraph or that sentence calls out has happened under various different administrations that were Republican as well as administrations that were Democratic. So again, when I read the title and the subtitle, it specifically states that this is a conservative agenda, right? It should also, in my opinion, this should also actually point out that the wasteful spending, the disproportionate disciplines or consequences for senior officials, as well as the security policies, have been made, some good, some bad, under both Democratic as well as Republican leadership. So this is not just a one party issue. This is an issue of political or politicians who have no real understanding, no practical application of being in the armed forces, making rules to govern things that they should have probably listened to our senior leaders who have the experience, have the education on making decisions and understand the soldiers on the battlefield. But American politicians often messed a lot of stuff up. But I'll continue. Our disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, our possibly muddled China strategy, the growing involvement of senior military officials in the political arena, and deep confusion about the purpose of our military are clear signals of disturbing decay and markers of a dangerous decline in our nation's capabilities and will. Now, that is not true. The military is still a very strong and lethal force. We have not lost that capability. We're able to rapidly deploy anywhere in the world and actually fight sustained missions at length, and not just that, but fight on multiple different fronts at multiple different times. So that, although I understand what it's trying to actually say and get at, there has been no degradation in the lethality of the armed forces. Now, the type of soldier that we're getting nowadays is vastly different from the type of soldier that I'm from. But again, I've got a couple decades under my belt, and the society shifts, and with the shifting of society, you get a different type of recruit, and that should be understandable. The only thing that I don't like about what's happening now is the Army has policies and procedures in place for a reason, and I don't think that we should be uh, so malleable that we follow trends of society, but we maintain a standard. That's where I am with that. And we have to maintain a standard because of what the convention of our career actually calls for. So we can't be like the regular civilian. We can't be as society wants us to be. We have to be fairly rigid in our standards and in our structure. So I'll continue. Additionally, more than 100,000 Americans die annually in large measures because of illicit narcotic flows, more than four times as many people in 1 year as we lost in our 20-year war against Al Qaeda. That is true, and we need to take a look at Big Pharma as to why we're in this opioid crisis. We also are witnessing a transformation in the character of war. This is true. The democratization of technology and the collapse of time and space require dramatic, thoughtful changes in how we defend, deter, and fight. As with any huge bureaucracy, and the DoD is one of the world's largest, breaking the status quo requires leadership and endurance. Technology is critical to maintaining our warfighting primacy, but we must be leery of the siren song that technology alone can protect us. I'll pause there and I will make a comment. And that comment is within the last couple of weeks, there are three things that I'll say to that. And that part I can agree with, right? When we become so over dependent on technology, we begin to lose very valuable skills that we've learned and cultivated through means of manual labor. Um, I don't want to call it Operation CrowdStrike, but CrowdStrike hindered and showed vulnerabilities within the American system that weren't previously seen or sought after as much or as hard as what they. I think this is my personal opinion. Is I think that they will be moving forward. Um, CrowdStrike dismantled a lot of different things, and it crippled our flight path, our mode of transportation. And if our mode of transportation is crippled and we are not able to function in manual procedures, then we lose the ability to move people from one point of safety to another if that place is compromised. So I very much agree that technology, the dependency, the over dependency on technology is going to hurt our society as a whole. And we are going to lose very valuable, meaningful things that we've learned through the process of manual labor. So I'll say that, I'll push that out, and then I'll also say it. I'll mention I got an article from a lady last week that pointed out that there was a North Korean operative who had um, essentially infiltrated multiple different cybersecurity areas and crippled hospitals, crippled an Air Force base, so on and so forth, and then vamped out of the country. So again, that is us becoming too dependent on technologies and losing the actual capabilities of manual labor and the lessons that are learned from that. So I think as a country, as a nation as a whole, we should be very, very leery of becoming overly dependent on different technologies. Technology is a good thing, don't get me wrong, and it's very useful and it makes things a lot more efficient, but we cannot lose the ability to function without technologies being in place. All right. So pick it back up. It said, so I'll read that again. Technology is critical to maintaining our warfighting primacy, but we also must be leery of the siren song that technology alone can protect us. More important is how new technologies are developed, tested, procured, and used, and that relies on the true competitive advantages of our people. Ingenuity, common sense, and thoughtfulness grounded in free society. Because war will continue to be the most stressful and consequential human endeavor, the most powerful weapon systems will remain the 6 inches between the ears of our citizens and the strength of their hearts and content of their souls. Military service is the most difficult task we ask our citizens, and our nation is enormously, wow, that doesn't happen often. Our nation is enormously blessed that so many young, patriotic Americans eagerly volunteer to carry such a heavy burden. We owe them everything, and we must do better. To do better, however, means recognizing and implementing four overriding priorities. Priority number one: reestablish a culture of command accountability, non-politicization, and warfighting focus. Priority number two: transform our armed forces for maximum effectiveness in an era of great power competition. Priority number three: provide necessary support to Department of Homeland Security's border protection operations. Border protection is a national security issue that requires sustained attention and effort by all elements of our executive branch. Priority number four: demand financial transparency and accountability. Right, like that's not going to happen. I'm just saying that ain't going to happen. They're not going to provide transparency in this, but I digress. So the other thing that I also wanted to mention was Russian and China fighters were seen roughly 200 miles off of Alaskan airspace performing refueling missions. So that indeed is a bit of a threat and a cause for concern. That's a pretty bold move by any standard and should be taken seriously. All right, DoD policy. By far the most significant danger to America's security, freedoms, and prosperity is China. I do not agree with that. I do not agree with that. I think by far the most significant danger to Americans, well, it does say Americans' security, but let me state this. I think by far the most dangerous thing to Americans are other Americans, unfortunately. But I digress. By far the most significant danger to Americans' security, freedoms, and prosperity is China. China is by any measure the most powerful state in the world other than the United States itself. It apparently aspires to dominate Asia and then, from that position, become globally permanent. Permanent. If Beijing could achieve this goal, it could dramatically undermine America's core interests, including by restricting U.S. access to the world's most important market. Preventing this from happening, oh, I got a message. Preventing this from happening must be the top priority for American foreign and defense policy. Beijing presents a challenge to American interests across the domains of national power, but the military threat that it poses is especially acute and significant. China is undertaking a historic military buildup that includes increasing capabilities for power projection not only in its own region, but also far beyond, as well as a dramatic expansion of its nuclear forces that could result in a nuclear force that matches or exceeds America's own nuclear arsenal. Like, I wish we were back in the days where leaders would fight each other. I'm just throwing that out there. Instead of bringing all the citizens in to take the place of ineffective leaders. I'm just, because goodness gracious, they have us in a pretty bad situation when they do that. MC, what's happening? The most severe immediate threat that Beijing's military poses, however, is to Taiwan and other U.S. allies along the first island chain of the Western Pacific. If China could subordinate Taiwan or allies like the Philippines, South Korea, and Japan, it could break apart any balancing coalition that is designed to prevent Beijing's hegemony over Asia. Accordingly, the United States must ensure that China does not succeed. This requires a denial defense, the ability to make the subordination of Taiwan or other U.S. allies in Asia prohibitively difficult. Critically, the United States must be able to do this at a level of cost and risk that Americans are willing to bear, given the relative importance of Taiwan to China and to the U.S. Now, Taiwan is still a part of China. I just want to throw that out there. It is not its own sovereign nation. It is not recognized as its own sovereign nation. So I just wanted to keep things on a level with that. The United States and its allies also face real threats from Russia, as evidenced by Vladimir Putin's brutal war in Ukraine, as well as from Iran, North Korea, and transitional terrorism at a time when decades of ill advised military operations in the greater Middle East, the atrophy of our defense industrial base, the impact of sequestration, and effective disarmament by many U.S. allies have exacted a high toll on America's society. This is a grim landscape. The United States needs to deal with these threats forthrightly and with strength, but it also needs to be realistic. It cannot wish away these problems. Rather, it must confront them with a clear eyed recognition of the need for choice, discipline, and adequate resources for defense. In this light, U.S. defense strategy must identify China unequivocally as the top priority for U.S. defense planning while modernizing and expanding the U.S. nuclear arsenal and sustaining an efficient and effective counterterrorism enterprise. U.S. allies must also set up, with some joining the United States in taking on China in Asia, while others take more of a lead in dealing with threats from Russia and Europe, Iran, the Middle East, and North Korea. I wonder if any of y'all have ever thought, if there's a Middle East, where's the Middle North, and the Middle South, and Middle West? Just wanted to point that out as well. Now, the reality is that achieving these goals will require more spending on defense, both by the United States and by its allies, as well as active support for reindustrialization and more support for allies, productive capacity, so that we can scale our free world efforts together. And so it's a call for assistance to take on China. And I understand why. Anyway, needed reforms, prioritizing a denial defense against China. U.S. defense planning should focus on China and, in particular, the effective denial defense of Taiwan. This focus and priority for U.S. defense activities will deny China the first island chain. Require that all U.S. defense efforts, from force planning to employment and posture, focus on ensuring the ability of American forces to prevail in the pacing scenario and deny China a fait accompli against Taiwan. Again, Taiwan is still a part of China. Prioritize the U.S. conventional force plan and construct to defeat a Chinese invasion of Taiwan before allocating resources to other missions, such as simultaneously fighting another conflict. We can actually already do a lot of stuff that he's saying. Anyway. Increase allied conventional defense burden sharing. U.S. allies must take greater responsibility for their conventional defense. U.S. allies must play their part not only in dealing with China, but also in dealing with threats from Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Make burden sharing a central part of U.S. defense strategy, with the United States not just helping allies set up, but strongly encouraging them to do so. Support greater spending for collaboration by Taiwan and allies in the Asia Pacific, like Japan and Australia, to create a collective defense model. Transform NATO, that's weird, but transform NATO so that U.S. allies are capable of fielding the great majority of the conventional forces required to deter Russia, while relying on the United States primarily for our nuclear deterrent, and select other capabilities while reducing U.S. force posture in Europe. Sustain support for Israel, even as America empowers Gulf partners to take responsibility for their own coastal, air, and missile defenses, both individually and working collectively. Enable South Korea to take the lead in its conventional defense against North Korea. That part I actually do agree with. Number 5. We are still doing that, by the way. I just want to also point that out as well. So implement nuclear modernization and expansion, which we actually do need to do, because our stuff is a bit old. Our stuff is old. The United States manifestly needs to modernize, adapt, and expand its nuclear arsenal. Humans have such a capacity for inflicting the maximum amount of damage on other humans, but we haven't figured out homelessness. That conundrum in and of itself shows a disturbing part of human nature that, when taking that in consideration, makes you the second guess, like, what is there any real humanism left in these actual segments of society? Is there at all? Expanding its nuclear arsenal. I'll continue. Russia maintains and is actively brandishing a very large nuclear arsenal, but China is also undertaking a historic nuclear breakout. 1. Expand and modernize the U.S. nuclear forces so that it has the size, sophistication, and tailoring to deter Russia and China simultaneously. 2. Develop a nuclear arsenal with the size, sophistication, and tailoring, including new capabilities at the theater level, to ensure that there is no circumstance in which America is exposed to serious nuclear coercion. Increase allied counterterrorist burden sharing. Transitional terrorism remains a threat to Americans even as we pivot toward Asia. So we need to, as he's saying, sustain the military forces needed to deter, prevent, and combat terrorism, but at a sustainable cost, in concert with other elements of national power and partner efforts. 2. Prioritize enhancing the capability of allies and partners to take the lead in combating terrorism in their regions. DoD acquisition and sustainment. This is my part of the life, right? A little bit. Mine is primarily logistics, but acquisitioning and sustainment is my part. The DoD's ability to acquire and field new and existing technologies is essential to the ability of America's military personnel to fight and win our nation's wars. To succeed in this endeavor, we must optimize the systems and personnel that the department uses, but the inflexible bureaucratic structure and risk-adverse culture that have developed over the decades make it difficult to provide the tools that warfighters need at the speed of relevance. There is some truth in that. However, the big part of this, the biggest issue that he's saying and did not actually put in here, is the payouts. The payouts to all of the different actors that are in acquisition and sustainment. Like, we spend, again, billions of dollars. It's over 50, a little bit, actually over 50% of our budget overall for the country. But the amount of wasteful spending to third parties is absolutely insane. The number one problem is the DoD budgeting process instituted in 1961 that requires, I'm sorry, I was looking at something that requires acquisition spending to be locked years in advance. Because technologies change so rapidly and requirement can change overnight, this creates situations in which military personnel not only go to war with outdated technology, but also may be fighting with equipment that is less capable than that of their competitors. And we did see that at the beginning of the Iraqi War, where we had a lot of soft vehicles that were being hit hard by different type of armaments that were somewhat homemade. So there is we are behind the power curve when it comes to relevant theater equipment to protect our soldiers as best as possible. That is somewhat truthful. America owes its military many things, and the most important is the resources they need to survive on the battlefield and carry out the tasks we ask of them. Needed reforms. Again, I am reading from Project 2025, and I'm just talking, this is the DoD portion. Reform the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution process. This is something that military members have been talking about for decades. We have been talking about getting this redone, restarted, and re-looked at for decades. But let's see what they say. How are we going to enhance funding? We're already at Jesus Christ. Anyway, enhance funding and authority for DoD missions focused innovation organizations and away from program specific stovepipes that planned for and designed 2 or 3 years earlier may no longer be relevant. This allows the acquisition community to focus on portfolio management and move money around more easily instead of being locked into inflexible multi-year procurement cycles. And also, what they need to do is look at getting different vendors. So, just throwing that out there. The president should examine the recommendations of the congressionally mandated Commission of Planning, Programming, Budgeting, and Execution Reform and develop a strategy for implementing those that the administration considers to be in the best interest of the American people. The Commission's final report is due on September 1st, 2023. So again, this is Project 2025. It was written before 2023. Develop legislation or other means of providing funding outside of the traditional double PBE process for the prototyping. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm looking at a message one of my battles sent me. Develop legislation or other means of providing funding outside of the traditional double PBE process for the prototyping and experimentation of emerging technologies that are deemed essential to modernization and future conflict. Consider creating a fast track for projects that satisfy the most pressing national security needs. The dangers with these is there is a process in place that once military members are separated from services, especially those senior leaders, they have to wait a specific amount of time in order to work for a DoD contractor. And what it sounds like essentially is that would end up being nixed. So people will have their hands in the cookie jar where they don't actually need to. And that will do nothing more, nothing less than create more bureaucratic processes that continue to hinder the force. I require the Undersecretary of Defense or Acquisition and Sustainment, the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, and all service secretaries to conduct night court and use existing authorities to terminate outdated or underperforming programs so that money can be used for what works and will work. Require the undersecretaries and service secretaries to brief the secretary annually on the results. Require the Office of the Secretary of Defense to research and report on the acquisition process used by America's adversaries to improve our understanding of how they are often able to innovate and field new technologies on a faster timeline. Well, that's not a guess. It's because the same vendors we buy from are the same vendors they buy from. Right? War is huge business. It's a capitalistic game. And so if I'm a developer making a specific type of technology for one segment, I'm not going to stop that project where it is. I'll continue pushing, and whoever's up next to buy my product, they're going to get the latest and greatest. That's the truth of the situation. It's a capitalistic movement. Anyway, So strengthen America's defense industrial base. Replenish and maintain U.S. stockpiles of ammunition and other equipment that have been depleted as a result of U.S. support to Ukraine. I'm going to read that again. Replenish and maintain U.S. stockpiles of ammunition and other equipment that have been depleted as a result of U.S. support to Ukraine, which is weird because earlier they're talking about um, essentially defeating Russia. But now they're talking about, because if you all didn't know, a lot of the munitions that are sent over, a lot of the things that we're sending over to Ukraine is older stockpiled equipment, right? It's stuff that essentially has been phased out of our arsenal. And that's a lot of the stuff that's going over to Ukraine. And it's odd that now they're talking about maintaining that ourselves and not supporting the Ukraine front for what I'm hoping this next sentence will actually elaborate on. It says this will strengthen the defense industry supply chain and ensure that adequate inventory exists if it is needed for future conflict. What that sounds like to me is simply saying he doesn't want to actually support Ukraine. Now, I'm neither for nor against. Or actually, what I'll say about that is I have my own opinions about Ukraine and the Russian war. But what that paragraph sounds like in and of itself is a movement to begin the process to stop assisting Ukraine in the manner that we have been. But again, previously, he talked about defeating Russia. Collaborate with industry to develop a prioritized list of reforms that the DoD and Congress can enact and implement to incentivize industry to help America's military innovate and field needed capabilities. I'm not going to go into detail how things are fielded, um, but we get rapid fieldings of equipment, and the reserves gets it last. So whatever, man. Strengthen the ability of acquisition authorities to engage in multi-year procurements and block buys. This will wow. This is a cold ass game. This is a cold ass game. This will improve yep, that's where I thought that's where I thought this was headed. This will improve private sector rates of return, thereby incentivizing defense contractors to partner with the government. It's incentivizing their buddies. Let's call it for what it is. It's going to incentivize they're going to give their buddies monies. That's what it sounds like. This will improve private sector rates of return, thereby golly. It will also reduce government overhead by reducing the number of procurement competitors. Wow. So now we're creating even more so a movement of oligarchy and the movement and the process of acquisitions by selecting what will essentially come out to be specific people to receive contracts from the government. Man, it's a cold ass game. Prioritize the U.S. and allies under the domestic end product and domestic components requirements of the Build America Buy America Act. I'll have to look up what that is. Currently, defense companies are required to manufacture defense items for the U.S. government that are 100% domestically produced and at least 50% composed of domestically produced components. However, there are loopholes that allows companies to manufacture these items overseas. Yes, and I do know about that. This can create supply chain and other issues, especially in wartime. That is somewhat true. Manufacturing components and end products domestically and with allies spurs factory development, increases American jobs, and builds resilience in America's defense industrial base. Number 5, review the sectors currently prioritized for onshoring or friendshoring of manufacturing, which are kinetic capabilities, castings and forgings, critical materials, microelectronics, space, and electrical vehicle batteries. Evaluate them according to the strategic landscape and expand or reprioritize the list as appropriate. I tell you what, if America was invested in making serious quality products at a reasonable price, I don't think that this would be an issue. Unfortunately, if you look at a lot of American vehicles, they're cheaply made, break down frequently, and the parts are crap. Anyway, I'll continue. I was about to continue on that chain, but I'm going to continue reading this. Help small businesses become medium-sized and large vendors, which encourages a more resilient industrial base and fosters competition. Encourage and plan for durable supply chains for small businesses so they also have commercial private sector customers and are not solely dependent on defense orders, which can be highly specialized, expensive, and irregular. Increase external engagement among small businesses to inform them of DoD's needs and how they could work with the DoD to meet national security priorities. Optimize the DoD acquisition community. Create incentives to emphasize speed and agility in decision making for prototyping and program of record starts and terminations. Most bureaucrats would rather follow a checklist and fail than go outside the procedures and win because failure means negative career repercussions. Senior acquisition leaders should design a system that allows decision makers to stay within the law but bypass unnecessary departmental regulations that are not in the best interest of the government and hamper the acquisition of capabilities that warfighters require. There is some agreement on my part with that paragraph. I do understand what he's saying in that. The Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, and all service secretaries should assess their acquisition workforces, determine what additional personnel resources and training they need, and develop implementation plans. The goal is to develop prototype acquired. Let me slow that down. The goal is to develop, prototype, acquire, and field required capabilities at the speed of relevance to meet America's pacing threats and maintain a warfighting advantage. Decentralized Defense Acquisition University offerings and expand the DAU mission to include accreditation of non DoD institutions. The critical shortage of trained and certified acquisition personnel must be addressed with urgency in order to support DoD mission objectives and goals. With the rapid evolution of training and educational technologies, including remote and virtual practices, there is no reason for DAU to maintain a monopoly of the knowledge and certification that are required to perform as acquisition professionals, as you were. Further, the cost to private contractors and non-DoD civilians who aspire to such a role limits the supply of trained and certified candidates. DAU has become an unnecessary barrier to entry in a career field that is vital to the DoD missions. I'll have to think about that. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I do understand decentralizing the grasp that DAU has on the military forces as far as certified training, as well as it has on for civilians. It's civilians who have to complete certain certificates inside of that institution. But I think a lot of that training is needed and necessary because you're dealing with governmental entities, and so there's sometimes where the law works differently with acquisitions, and so some of those programs are specific towards a certain thing that the person who's going to take on that job must actually understand and know in order to perform it better. So I think the maintenance of DAU would be a good thing. um, I think decentralizing that would be a bit of a problem because you can't always regulate how private institutions are going to certify their people to standard or code or below in order to meet that demand. And what we can't really do, what we can't afford, is to lower the standard um, simply to satisfy a friend. And that's what it sounds like and seems like it's happening throughout me reading this without actually having putting much thought into a lot of the stuff that I'm reading out loud. But I don't think I like where this is going. Anyway, DoD Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation. The fiscal year 2017 National Defense Authorization Act established the position of Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering and assigned broad responsibility for all defense research and engineering technology development, technology transition, prototyping, experimentation, and developmental testing activities and programs, including the allocation of resources for defense research and engineering and unifying defense research and engineering efforts across the department. To the new undersecretary, who also was tasked with serving as the principal advisor to the secretary on all research, engineering, and technology development activities and programs in the department. This led to the single largest DoD structural change since the Goldwater Nichols Act of 1986 and was organized effectively during President Donald Trump's administration. Side eye. Side eye. I don't think I agree with that last sentence there, but that's neither here nor there. Let's see what they say about needed reforms, however. Champion, engage, and focus the American innovation ecosystem. To maintain leadership in the era of great power competition and succeed against our adversaries, a key DoD effort must be the creation of mechanisms and processes to embrace America's most significant competitive advantage: innovation. Engage and leverage all of America's scientific, engineering, and high tech production communities to research, develop, prototype, and rapidly deploy advanced technology capabilities on a continuing basis to preserve our warfighting advantage. And we're actually still doing that. We've been doing it and we'll continue to do it. And we do a great job at it, quite honestly. We could do a better job, but we still do a great job at it. Increase integration and collaboration among the DoD government labs and private companies to solve the department's most difficult problems. I, I I'll pause there because I do think that we could do a better job with the private sector with bringing in some of their subject matter experts to assist in furthering the development of military programs. I that part I understand directly. Reduce the number of critical technology. Now, when I say that, that's also with the understanding that when we're dealing with the private sector, the civilians that we deal with must understand that, again, what our convention is and what the end goal is. It's not always to save as many lives as possible, but it is to win wars. So they have to have that understanding. They must understand what the nature of that collaboration in business, that scientific expansion is going to look like and what it's for. Reduce the number of critical technology areas from 14 to a more manageable number to concentrate effort and resources on those that bear directly on great power competition. Rebuild RDT&D infrastructure that resides in Cold War era facilities and is not well suited to the current era of rapid development and testing of advanced technology and concepts to the maturity level necessary for acquisition and operational fielding. Move toward a much more comprehensive independent risk reduction approach to increase understanding of the technical risks by drawing on the expertise and DoD laboratories and agencies to help acquisition programs. I wonder if I can um, add this to TikTok. I'll have to figure that out later. I'm reading. I'm going to keep going. Improve the rapid deployment of technology to the battlefield. America's militaries America's military advantage has derived from the professionalism of our service members and our ability to manifest our technological advantage in battlefield capability. The current era of great power competition will continue for the foreseeable future, and technology will be the currency of competition. Our ability to prevail will rest on our ability to develop new technologies and move them onto the battlefield more rapidly than our adversaries can. Accelerate the prototyping cycle to meet immediate battlefield needs. Now, I just want y'all to understand that as I'm reading this and that they're going through this, you must understand that all of the things that they're trying or wanting to implement in this, it has to be tested. It has to be tested in real time and in real space. And so a lot of these technologies that they're essentially talking about uh, and wanting are going to be tested. And so that means that we may find ourselves uh, in places and areas that we probably didn't need to be, except for to test in real time these practices. And that what I'm talking about directly is the acceleration, the rapid deployment of new technologies to the battlefield. So that's something that we have to take in consideration that they're actually talking about when I'm reading this document. All right. So I'll read it again. Accelerate the prototyping cycle to meet immediate battlefield needs. Require tighter integration with user communities to provide value. Establish a pipeline of near-term, mid-term, and long-term technology that is aimed at great power competition, in parentheses, China, and can be matured, prototyped, and evaluated to support major acquisitions. The ability to produce at scale, to break the cycle of schedule delays and cost overruns from underdeveloped and poorly understood technologies. Develop a framework to protect the RDT&D enterprise from foreign exploitation. I don't know how they're going to do that because again, when we're talking about acquisitions and we're talking about war, you must understand that war is global business. It's a huge thing. It's a real thing, and it's something that um, drives global economics. So that a lot of the stuff is I understand what they're saying, but I'm also reading between the lines of what they're saying. All right, develop a framework to protect the RDT&D enterprise from foreign exploitation. Strategic competition and adaptive adversaries require new thinking about how to protect technology. China has been relentless in stealing U.S. technologies, which is true, using the full range of measures from influence operations to outright theft. This has been a major factor in its ability to close the gap and in some cases to exceed U.S. capabilities. Implement a comprehensive approach to preserving U.S. technological leadership that is based on outpacing our adversaries, clear about what we need to protect, tailored to various specific sectors, for example, academia, the defense industrial base, and laboratories, and underpinned with a full range of consequences for attempted or actual theft. DoD foreign military sales. The United States must regain its role as the arsenal of democracy. Some of this stuff is just cringeworthy if you actually understand and hear what they're saying. It's just absolutely cringeworthy. Goodness. In fiscal year 2021, U.S. government foreign military sales nosedived to a low of 34.8 billion from a record high of 55.7 billion in fiscal year 2018. This decrease hinders interoperability with partners and allies, decreases defense industrial base capacity, and I didn't even know. I didn't know. I didn't know that I had been reading for an hour. But I'm gonna continue. I'm gonna continue. So I'll pick it back up. This decrease hinders interoperability with partners and allies, decreases defense industrial base capacity, and increases the taxpayer burden on the U.S. military's own procurements. Under previous administrations, the United States built its reputation as a reliable partner with a strong defense industrial base that could supply military articles and goods in a timely manner. Today's FMS process is encumbered by Byzantine bureaucracy, long contracting times, high cost, and mundane technology. The United States can change this downward trajectory by improving internal processes that incentivize partners and allies to procure U.S. defense systems, thereby expanding our defense ecosystem. We must reverse the recent dip in FMS to ensure both that our partners remain interoperable with the United States and that our defense industrial base regains much needed capacity in preparation for future challenges. Needed reforms continued. This one is emphasize exportability with U.S. procurements. The record low FMS sales in 2021 were driven partly by the high cost. Wait a minute, who was president? Anyway, okay. The record low FMS sales in 2021 were driven partly by the 2018. I'm just now thinking about the years that this is talking about, but I'll continue. The record low FMS sales in 2021 were driven partly by high cost of converting weapon systems on the back end of production rather than emphasizing exportability and initial capability planning. Okay. Ensure that senior U.S. military leadership emphasizes exportability and the initial development of defense systems that are both available and interoperable with our partners and allies. Create a funding mechanism to incentivize exportability and initial planning, which can be recouped after future FMS transactions. End informal congressional notification. I will not agree with that. I will not agree with that. I haven't even read what it's talking about or what it's saying, but I won't agree to it because if it's taking the turn that I think it's taking, I'm not on board with that. So I read this subparagraph again. End informal congressional notification. Informal congressional notification or tiered review is a hindrance to ensuring timely sales to our global partners. This is how a lot of this money is going to be lost. A lot of these transactions are going to be shuffled. There's no if there is no informal or formal notification by Congress, the people will never know about it. Wow. And informal congressional notification. That says a lot. Informal congressional notification or tiered review is a hindrance to ensuring timely sales to our global partners. The tiered review process is not codified in law. It is merely a practice by which the Department of State provides a preview of prospective arms transfers before Congress is formally notified. In the tier review process, to eliminate at least 20 days from the FMS process, use the tiered review process only when unanimous congressional support is guaranteed in order to eliminate the weaponization by select members of Congress, which will probably be the Democratic Party, since this is a conservative document. Use a tiered review process only when unanimous congressional support is guaranteed in order to eliminate the weaponization by select members of Congress that has prevented billions of dollars of arms sales from moving into formal congressional notification. Minimize barriers of collaboration. The high cost of developing advanced defense platform requires the United States to collaborate with key allies to minimize waste, complement strengths, and supplement our defense industrial base to create a system that is greater than that of the United States alone. Enhance defense industrial base planning with partners to allow them to focus on niche areas where there are cost advantages for the United States. Decrease international traffic and arms regulation. Jeez. Holy cow. Holy cow. Anyway, decrease international traffic and arms regulations to facilitate trade with such allies as the UK, Canada, and Australia. Create opportunities to improve the health of the defense supply chain with added opportunities for partners and allies to contribute. Reform the FMS contracting process. The contracting timeline for the FMS process is shockingly slow. On average, the DoD contracting timeline takes approximately 18 months because of slow bureaucratic processes and chronic understaffing. And it also takes such a long time because none of y'all, none of them, not the audience, but none of these jokers can pass a budget. We've been pushing a continuing resolution act for the longest. That's the tying up of funding. That ties up funding. That ties up how we get paid as military members as well. Right? This it's not pointing to self. It's talking about all these external influences, but it's not addressing everything that it needs to. And I think that is such a disingenuous approach at writing this. I see where they're trying to capitalize on spending and giving the buddies money and taking power away from the people. But I'm not reading where it's taking all into consideration and actually dealing with that. I'll read that again. The contracting timeline for the FMS process is shockingly slow. On average, the DoD contracting timeline takes approximately 18 months because of slow bureaucratic processes and chronic understaffing. This also runs into everybody wanting to have last minute engagement with when it's time to pass a resolution. A buddy of mine said it best. When Congress is fighting, the American people actually do better because they're trying to that they need us when it comes to that. You know, when Congress is divided, the American people we do better. Anyway, immediately fund more contracting capacity in all services to decrease the contracting timeline and improve the delivery of defense articles to our global partners. Rationalize and speed arms sales decision making to preclude our enemies from exploiting bureaucratic slothfulness and allow us to manage the development of indigenous defense industrial bases. I'm not sure where they're going with that second point. I think he was just adding stuff to sound good. DoD personnel. The men and women of America's armed forces are the most critical component of our national defense strategy. But in recent years, they have been overextended, undervalued, and insufficiently resourced. Their families help them to carry the burden of service, but the assistance they receive is disproportionately less than the sacrifices they make. Young civilians who would thrive in a military environment are disenfranchised when educators and influence discourage them from learning about military service and preparing for the honor of wearing America's uniforms. So, what it sounds like is they want to go from one form of indoctrination to another, right? And that is setting the stage for the fictitious movement of American exceptionalism. That's what that's setting the stage for. The United States military is an extraordinary institution, this is true, staffed by exceptional people who have defended our nation and changed the course of history. But the Biden administration, through word and deed, has treated the armed forces as just another place to work. We must restore our military to a place of honor and respect and recruit and retain the individuals who would meet the rigorous standards of excellence that are required of membership in the world's greatest fighting force. What I will say is, I remember while President Trump was in office, he promised these tax breaks, and we all got them, but we also saw where we had to pay back a portion, if not all, of what he promised on the front end. It was pretty frustrating, but hilarious at the same time. Needed reforms, rescue recruiting and retention. This is going to be interesting. Recruiting was the worst in 2022. That's true that it had been in 2 generations and is expected to be even worse in 2023, which it has been, which it was. Some of the problems are self-inflicted and ongoing. The recruiting problem is not self-service specific. It affects the entire joint force. That's true also. Appoint a special assistant to the president who will maintain liaison with Congress, DoD, and all other interested parties on the issue of recruiting and retention. I wish that they would actually go and talk to recruiters and the retention NCOs and officers who are out here doing the work instead of making another position that's going to take away from what they're actually trying to do. Right? I have several battles that are in the recruiting and the retention business. And they're saying that it's not the fact that they're not putting in the hours. Many of them are putting in tons of hours, right? Many of them are putting in a lot of work and they're doing their best. Unfortunately, what we see, one of the reasons why this is my personal belief, one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of the retention that we need it was made manifest when Biden and Trump were standing on the stage to debate. The face of America hasn't changed. And at a certain point, it gets exhausting. It gets absolutely exhausting. There was no hope for me personally. There's a fruit fly just ticking me off. But it gets exhausting. There was no hope in either candidate as far as a progression or the meaning or the ability for someone to feel inspired to join the services when looking at that stage. We saw 2 elderly men fighting for power and to maintain power. Now, the ideas were different and the reasons why they were up there were different, but we saw the same picture for those of us who watched it. 2 old white men fighting for power. That does not draw the best movement or inspiration to join the services. And now the idea is to simply create another position to try and make my poor brothers and sisters who are out in these streets doing the work even more. Bureaucrats. Improve recruiting by suspending the use of the recently introduced MHS Genesis system that uses private medical records of potential recruits at military interest processing stations, which is MEPS, creating unnecessary delays and unwarranted rejections. Some of these rejections are warranted. Very many different reasons. I trust MEPS. I'm gonna just throw that out there. I do trust MEPS on a lot of different situations. Not all, but a lot of different ones. Improve military recruiters' access to secondary schools and require completion of the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. Just making the military entrance examination by all students in schools that receive federal funding. I'm gonna read that again. Improve military recruiters' access to secondary schools and require completion of the ASVAB by all students in schools that receive federal funding. Nah, I'm not with that. I'm not with that. I'm not with that at all. That's I'm not with that, because what you're doing is you're saying that if you receive any federal Pell Grants or anything of the such or anything of the sort, you automatically have to take an ASVAB. I don't think I like that idea, because I think that the next progression for that is it's going to be a forced movement of service, and that will nullify the all volunteer force that we have. Anyway, encourage members of Congress to provide time to military recruiters during each town hall session in their congressional districts. I can agree with that. Increase the number of junior ROTC programs in secondary schools. So again, it's a movement of indoctrination that they're pushing for. Restore standards of lethality and excellence. Entrance criteria for the military service and specific occupational career fields should be based on the needs of those positions, which they are. Exceptions for individuals who are already prepositioned to require medical treatment, for example, HIV positive or suffering from gender dysphoria, should be removed, and those with gender dysphoria should be expelled from military service. Don't agree. I do not agree. Oh, I do not agree. Oh, it's targeting people. Listen, I'm gonna tell y'all this. As a war vet, I don't care what you're suffering from. And it's gonna sound harsh. I'm gonna tell you this: if we're on the battlefield, I don't care what you consider yourself. The only thing I give a shit about is if you know how to make rounds fly down range. That is the only thing that matters. The only thing that matters. This is a targeted position. This is a targeted move to exclude people based on personal desire. That's what this is, which is odd because during the, from what I heard, right, and this is alleged, during the RNC convention, I don't know if y'all saw that Tinder went up, and it was male on male, unanimous, not unanimous, but male on males seeking male on male stuff. Weird. It was weird. Highly recommend y'all go and look at that. So, anyway, this is telling me to learn more about U.S. elections. I'm glad it said that because I need to. I got to get registered. All right. Anyway, I'll go on with that because that kind of threw me off a little bit. I'll read that again. Entrance criteria for military service and specific occupational career fields should be based on the needs of that position, again, with which there are. Exceptions for individuals who are already prepositioned to require medical treatment, for example, HIV positive or suffering from gender dysphoria, should be removed, and those with gender dysphoria should be expelled from military service. Again, middle fingers to this guy for that. Physical fitness requirements should be based on the occupational field without consideration of gender, race, ethnicity, or orientation. No, that's not true. at one point I did think like that, but since I've been in, as long as I've been in, I think our standards are, at least the Army, our standards are where they need to be. Sometimes I think they should be higher. Sometimes I think they should be lower. But I think we recently went through a change of physical fitness tests, and based off of the feedback I'm getting from it now, it's actually a bit better than what we used to do. Um, So, with that being said, our physical fitness tests and requirements are not based on race or ethnicity. I just want to throw that out there. There may be a different thing when it comes to orientation and gender. Gender is understandable. Orientation is something different. That's something that I think we're going to have to deal with very soon here. But um, it's not based on race or ethnicity. The height and weight scales, however, do need to be updated and they need to be more honest about it. So I'll leave that at that. Eliminate politicization, reestablish trust and accountability, and restore faith to the force. In 2021, the Reagan National Defense Survey found that only 45% of Americans have a great deal of trust and confidence in the military, down from 70% in 2018. Strengthen protections for chaplains to carry out their ministry according to the tenets of their faith. No, chaplains are authorized to, and this is just from my understanding because I'm not in the chaplaincy, but chaplains can practice their own faith. However, since the services are made up of multiple different religions, right? It'd be doing service members a disservice if we only had, for example, Christian chaplains, right? I don't think that that's a good look. I don't think that that would work properly. I don't think it would fare well. And I think that it would create more of an issue within the ranks than it will help. Codifying language to instruct senior military officers, 3 and 4 stars, to make certain that they understand their primary duty to be ensuring the readiness of the armed forces, which for the most part, for the generals that I've met, they do understand that. Not pursuing a social engineering agenda, and none of them have. Uh, this direction should be reinforced during the Senate confirmation process, which the Republicans actually began to hold up. There was one Republican senator, if memory serves me right, that held up the ability for uh, colonels who were promotable, as well as different grade general officers to be promoted because he had his thumb up his ass. Anyway, this direction should be reinforced during the Senate confirmation process. Orders and direction motivated by purely partisan motives should be identified as threats to readiness. Reinstate service members to active duty who were discharged for not receiving the COVID vaccine, restore their appropriate rank, and provide back pay. They won't provide back pay. Eliminate Marxist indoctrination and diversity and divisive critical race theory programs, and abolish newly established diversity, equity, and inclusion offices and staff, which is a load of bullshit. They uh, anyway. I'm just reading the targeted practices. I'm simply reading Project 2025 and what their makeup of things are. And at this point, what he's saying about what the military should look like, I'm not on. I'm not on. It's a load of shit. Personally, that's how I feel about it. And I'm going to slow down because I'm going to start getting passionate, and I'll probably try to find his email and write him one. But anyway, restrict the use of social media solely for purposes of recruitment and discipline any armed service personnel who use an official command channel to engage with civilian critics on social media. Audit the course of offerings at military academies to remove Marxist indoctrination, eliminate tenure for academic professionals, and apply the same rules to instructors that are applied to other DoD contracting personnel. Reverse policies that allow transgender individuals to serve in the military. Gender dysphoria is incompatible with the demands of military service, and the use of public monies for transgender surgeries or to facilitate abortion for service members should be ended. That's what's in here. I'll read that again. Project 2025. This is what it says. Reverse policies that allow transgendered individuals to serve in the military. Gender dysphoria is incompatible with the demands of the military service, and the use of public monies for transgender surgeries or to facilitate abortion for service members should be ended. Project 2025. Value the military family, which they don't. Military service requires extreme sacrifices by families. Support legislation to increase wages and family allowances for active duty enlisted personnel. No uniformed personnel should ever have to rely on social benefits like food stamps or public housing assistance. Improve base housing and consider the military family historic, holistic. Improve. I'm gonna have to drink some water in a second. Improve base housing and consider the military family holistically when considering change of station moves. That's an impossible thing, but I understand what he's saying. Improve spouse employment opportunities and protections, including licensing reform, and expand childcare. But they're also trying to gut childcare. We're going to see that in a little bit. Audit all curricula and health policies in DoD schools for military families. Remove all inappropriate materials and reverse inappropriate policies. And I would like for them to be specific as to what they're talking about when making that statement. Support legislation giving education savings account options to military families. Reduce the number of generals. This is something that's been talked about for a long time, so this one doesn't surprise me. Rank creep is pervasive. The number of 06, which is full bird colonel, to 09, which begins the general officer ranks, is at an all-time high across the armed services, above World War II levels, which I kind of understand, especially since we're fighting different types of wars. We're on multiple different types of platforms and contingencies, so you're going to need more movements of leadership. However, that's something to be explored. And the actual battlefield experience of this officer corps is at an all-time low. Yeah, the next president should limit the continued advancement of many of the existing cadre, many of whom have been advanced by prior administrations for reasons other than their warfighting prowess. Yes. So just if you all didn't know, general officers don't all command. There is a commanding general officer, and then you have staff general officers, just like you have command sergeants major and you have sergeants major, staff sergeants major. And their expertise and experience are very pinnacle when performing in their various duties. Some of them have very specific skills, and they may have never seen a battlefield, but they don't always need to see a battlefield. However, they may be going out to other areas in the world, and their rank would need to be equivalent or close to those in whom they speak with. Uh, so I understand what he's saying. However, I think he's saying this through a very narrow lens. Shout out to the civil affairs community for helping me understand why I just said that. And I still don't really like y'all, but shout out to you anyway. DoD intelligence. Our national defense establishment must evolve to meet the rapid, profound, and dynamic change in the global landscape, but absent significant effort to evaluate and retool in critical areas, including our intelligence and security portfolios. America's competitive advantages against rivals and adversaries is at serious risk. However, for any structural changes to succeed, the crisis in our intelligence community, defense intelligence enterprise, leadership must be addressed. The DIE, I don't know what it is, happened, something blinked. The DIE accounts for the bulk of the intelligence community's personnel and a significant portion of its budget. Of the IC's 17 elements, 8 are within DoD, 2 are independent, and 7 belong to various other departments and agencies. Overall, the DoD provides 86% of the personnel who conduct intelligence activities, both military and civilian. The Defense Intelligence Enterprise must deliver accurate, unbiased, and timely insights consistently and with clarity, objectivity, and independence. If they continue on their own current path, however, both the DIE and the intelligence uh, writ- community writ large will continue to provide inaccurate and politicized intelligence assessments that mislead policymakers. And I think that's simply being said because of the things that uh, former President Trump had recently been going through, as well as his disparaging comments towards different organizations. Improve the intelligence process. Defense intelligence assets have been committed to the prosecution of operational campaigns since September 11, 2001, at the expense of our strategic objectives, and this has led to increased risks. Further, the DIE has evolved into a customer based model, with the DIE or IC trying to be supportive of policy direction at the expense of analytical integrity. The result has been a significant politicization of intelligence. I gotta think about that. I've gotta think about that. Established unbiased intelligence reporting from the DIE-IC senior leaders. As a leader of the DIE, the Undersecretary of the Defense for Intelligence and Secretary should provide a top-line, dissenting, and or clarifying view of DIE and IC assessments as needed. Align collection and analysis with vital national interests, countering China and Russia. Establish an effective global federated intelligence framework with allies and partners and our combatant commands. Avoid the temptation to neglect areas that appear less pertinent but that support a convergence of threats and the critical requirements to sustain those threats. Establish and sustain feedback loops to provide insight and direction for continuous improvement and accountability. We must revisit our assessments and understand where we got it right, and where we got it wrong. Better exploit publicly Better exploit publicly available information data, and foster innovation to improve collection and analysis. We must end the practice of multiple DIE organizations paying to acquire the same PAI data and invest more in machine learning and artificial intelligence to exploit open source and classified intelligence data. I'd rather speak to the community about that. Remove policy obstacles that impede available technical solutions and tailor approaches in order to preclude corruption at the point of collection. Develop statistical discrimination techniques based on relative value to deal with the volume and velocity of available data and information, which are rapidly exceeding our ability to exploit and analyze available data and information efficiently. Hey, AI's turn our asses up. It's turned everybody up. Expand the integration of intelligence activities. The prevalence of asymmetric warfare requires defensive intelligence to leverage the unique authorities and capabilities of U.S. departments and agencies, as well as our partners and allies. To competitive advantage. Create an improved cyber defense and capability. We must reevaluate the dual hat structure between the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command, which is actually a very new command. U.S. Cyber Command is very new. Resurrect economic analysis capability to improve our ability to counter Chinese whole of government strategies that combine security with predatory economic objectives. Resurrect critical thinking to provide true strategic intelligence that will enable the U.S. to counter global adversaries and emerging technologies such as adversary advances and hypersonics, UASs, cyber domain, advanced fighter aircraft, and advanced undersea capabilities more effectively. Rebuild human. I remember having to go through human stuff. And counterintelligence, and improve their integration with defensive and offensive cyber operations. Establish the true alignment between DoD and DHS, both to improve the defense of critical U.S. infrastructure and national border integrity, and to develop vital information that enables defense against foreign targeted disruptions. Restore accountability and public trust. In recent years, public trust in the defense intelligence has been eroded by, for example, flawed assumptions leading up to our Afghanistan withdrawal, which I just want to make sure everyone understands. Former President Trump was the author of the Afghanistan withdrawal. All right. Flawed Russia-Ukraine assessment, divergences in relations with key Gulf allies, and voids being filled by Russia and China around the world. For trust to be restored and sustained, officials must be held accountable. I don't know how much I've read. What I will say, however, is I'll read through page 107, and I'll post the link again if anyone wants to hop on and give their spiel what they think. and I'll be closing out shortly. I've been reading for almost an hour 30 minutes, maybe yeah, about an hour 30 almost, an hour 25 at the very least. So I want to drink some water, and I cooked today, so I want to cook. I want to go eat rather, eat a little bit. Plus, I got to work in the morning, so talk to my lady and play some Call of Duty. Restore DEI critical thinking, establish mechanism to restore analytical integrity, return true intelligence driven operations. The next administration should eliminate the conflict of interest in the current customer based model in which the customer is always right, which they don't have that. By enforcing time tested procedures that guarantee independent analysis, even if it means challenging policymakers' assumptions. The Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security's leadership role should be expanded to include providing analytic top line views and improve DIE transparency by highlighting diverging views. Elevate the DIE's voice in national policy discussions, commensurate with the DIE's 75% share of the IC budget. Present defense intelligence to senior policymakers, either independently to avoid all source bias or in consensus products like the national intelligence estimates. Eliminate peripheral intelligence obligations that do not advance military readiness. Eliminate peripheral intelligence obligations. I'll think about that. In 2019, following the catastrophic 2015 data breach at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management (OPM), the uh, the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency accepted transfer of the responsibility to conduct security clearance and suitability investigations for 95% of the U.S. government's civilian workforce. This decision, which grew out of an intention to deconstruct OPM, was wrongheaded on many levels and made the federal bureaucracy dependent on a new overlay of DoD bureaucracy, in a sense, instilling DoD control of civilian managers. This function should be returned to OPM except for military security clearance investigations. Ah, dang. I'm at U.S. Army. Mm, but I'm going to end at 107. I'll pick it back up. I might do this for the next couple days just to get through some things. Um, but yeah, I'm going to continue. Let me see. I started at the top of this. I think it was, let me see. Let me see. Go back to the table of contents. A lot of the stuff I read earlier. Um, and so there may have been some information that y'all missed. What I read earlier was simply a breakdown of how the different offices, starting from the president, are broken down. Who's supposed to do what, who says what, different authorities, so on and so forth. So yeah, it was a couple of weeks ago. So okay, I started at page 91 and I'm at 107. I think that's enough for now. Yeah, that's enough for now. I'll pick it back up tomorrow evening and we'll start at the army. I'm interested in seeing what he's got to say. But a lot of the stuff that has been written, I've been given my personal views on, um, my dissenting opinions, as it were. But I'd like to know what everyone else thinks. So if you want to, by all means, feel free to hit the link and hop in and tell me what you think. I'll pause and place for a few minutes here. I don't want to be on too long. I've got some other edits that I need to do later on. But if no one wants to hop on, that is very much fine. I still, however, do appreciate you all um, coming to hang out with me and listening to me as I read Project 2025. Um, I'll continue to read as we push further, and the hope is instead of simply listening to what people are saying, that I'm actually putting things in context and you're hearing me read this line by line, uh, word for word, what it's saying. There's nothing that I'm including in on the information. I'm simply reading what it's actually saying. So if I got no takers, I absolutely appreciate uh, everyone hopping on and listening to me. And I will bid you all do hey, I hope you all have a great week coming up. Hey, shout out to my bonus baby Sydney. Tomorrow's her birthday. I won't tell y'all how old she is. That's her business and not for me to tell. But happy birthday, Sid. I hope it's a blast. I hope you're hearing me say that to you. If not, no worries. I will make sure to call you tomorrow to wish you a very happy birthday. All right. With that being said, as always, uh, be the reflection of love that you want to see, and register to vote. Register to vote. All right, and just be good people. Uh, with that being said, again, thank you for coming out. God bless and good night.